All right, next we have Christina. So Christina is actually from GitHub, and she's going to talk to us about ethics of AI. It's a crucial topic for all of us, and talking about historical lessons from the past of ethics and technology and how we can apply that to AI today. So let's give a round of applause for Christina.
Everybody, hello. Can you hear me? Hi, everybody. So happy to be here. My name is Christina Entcheva. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Super hyped to be here with y'all. This is my first time in Nashville, and it is a lovely city. I've enjoyed meeting a bunch of you last night, and I look forward to meeting lots of new folks again today. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm going to be talking about ethics in technology. We're going to take a look at some history, practice, and then we're going to talk about how we mitigate. As mentioned, I work at GitHub. I've been there for 2 years. I'm a director of engineering there, and I lead a couple of teams that work on Blackbird, which is our code search engine. And then we also work on Copilot. So if you're familiar with Copilot, it's an AI pair programmer. You might be familiar with Copilot in the context of in your IDE, and you have what we call code completions, right? Copilot gives you suggestions to complete your code. Love Copilot. That is not the Copilot that I work on. So what we're looking to do next is kind of bring Copilot across the full software development lifecycle. Specifically, Copilot Chat is available in the IDE, but it's also available in github.com. So I focus largely on github.com, so in the context of a repository or a file or a diff or a pull request, et cetera, issues, discussions, et cetera, like how can Copilot help me in my day-to-day work? Right now, that's part of Copilot Enterprise, but we are excited about bringing more of that functionality to more of the Copilot SKUs. I hope it doesn't surprise anybody that in a talk about ethics and AI, we're going to talk about some sensitive things. It might be difficult conversations that I think are, necessary to have. We're going to get through it together, so hang on there with me, please. So as everybody knows, it's an incredibly exciting time in the industry. There's a lot of potential, and lots of different industries are getting into AI, and everyone's excited about what's possible. There's also kind of this perspective where folks are thinking, like, this is going to end up really badly. I don't know if your relatives around the Thanksgiving table are some of those folks. I get asked all the time about AI and how scary it is. So, I think in reality, that dichotomy is simplistic, right? It's not one or the other. Might be a little bit of both. And, kind of one of my theses today is that, like, we are players in this game, and we're here, and we have an opportunity to affect the outcome. So as I was doing research for this talk, I came across this article, AI is neither the Terminator nor a benevolent super being, just trying to make the point of the previous slide. However, I came across this quote in that article. Technologies themselves are ethically neutral. It's people who decide whether to use them for good or evil. So Maxime Fedorov, don't know this person. I'm sure they have a lot to offer the AI industry, and they're awesome. This is actually like a really succinct way to state the opposite of what I'm trying to argue. So I'm going to make the point today that I don't think technologies themselves are ethically neutral. I think that they may appear neutral, but certainly the second part is true, right? People decide whether to use them for good or evil. But actually, I'm here to make the case that despite our best intentions, technologies that are actually meant to be neutral or benevolent end up causing harm, and then often causing harm to the very people that they purport to protect. And again, like I said, it's our responsibility as leaders. We are in this space, and it's a burgeoning new industry, and we should influence change here, and we should mitigate the risk. I'm in this now, so I'm incentivized that AI can live up to the hype and succeed. And some of these horror stories work against that. So I think we can all work together to influence here. So I think at the core of this, data sets are infallible. They're fallible. They are incomplete. They're unbalanced. And the data sets are what the models train on, right? So every model that you're using is training on some data set. I have never seen a data set that I think is complete or perfect. And that's kind of the foundation of the problem that I'm going to talk about today. So I want to take a deep dive into predictive policing as a case study. It's just well known in the industry, and it's easy to talk about. And I think it's not easy to talk about, but there's a lot of literature on it. And I think the principles hold true in other applications. Anybody heard of predpol before? Raise your hand if you heard of predpol. All right, so one person. So PredPol is software its goal is predictive policing. And the premise is this is a software, it's a subscription that law enforcement agencies can buy. And the goal is that it provides targeted real-time crime prediction designed for and successfully tested by officers in the field. So the predictive algorithm that PredPol uses, it's called ETAS, Epidemic Type Aftershock Sequence. It's used to predict earthquakes, and it's like a standard statistical model for seismicity. So PredPol is taking this algorithm that's typically applied to earthquake prediction and applying it to crime prediction. So PredPol is looking at previous crime data, and then it's using that to predict like where the future crime will occur. It's looking at citizens' calls for police service, right? Somebody calls the police, or patrol officers observe crime reports, right? So I'm on patrol, I'm in my car, I see something, I note it down. And it's looking at the crime type, crime location, date and time of crime. Pretty straightforward, right? So the predictions here, the red squares are predictions for crime that day. So on your day on patrol, you're gonna get a list. Here's like where crime could occur. And then, like I said, like any observed crime that the officers see when they're out on patrol gets added back to the database. Geolytica, yes, it's called Geolytica now. Big rebrand after this, spoiling it. It didn't go well. Okay, so what happened? I want to start with this point. I think that it's important to start here. It does not work well at all. And you know, for those of us who are AI practitioners, we know like AI is not 100%. You'll see this is like way far off from that, right? I think if this works really well, there might be some like nuance to the conversation that we could really dig into that it just like doesn't apply here. So in 2023, Wired did some investigations into Geolytica / PredPol's predictions, and they found that they were right less than 1% of the time. So they took a look at roughly 24,000 predictions that were made for the Plainfield Police Department between February and December in 2018, and the accuracy percentage, like I said, was less than 1%. So for all predictions overall, it was 0.4%. Robbery or aggravated assault only is 0.6, slightly better, and then burglary only is 0.1%. So again, you know, like many of us work on AI, and AI is fallible, and it doesn't succeed a lot of the time. 0.6% generously is like really, really abysmal. So like this just does not work. So then what happened around that same time, the LAPD, they were using PredPol for a while, and then they decided they were going to use this other type of software that's like related, just a different brand, and then they ended up dropping both of those subscriptions over time. Santa Cruz became the first US city to ban predictive policing outright. And lots of publications, news outlets, and like intellectual papers wrote articles about the problems of predictive policing and how the outcomes were biased. So you know, this is obviously very controversial. And again, don't forget, like it doesn't work, so it's a bad combo. Yeah.
There's an anime out called Psychopaths that basically something about this. If you want to see like a kind of dystopian show that's shows something like that, watch that anime.
Okay.
It's exactly.
Love it. Psychopaths, is that what you said? Okay, everybody check out Psychopaths, the anime. All right, so what's the problem here? So I'm going to posit the data suffers from two big problems. One of them I'm calling over-representation. That's my own term. There are probably different names for it. I'm choosing to call it that for today. And then the other is a self-reinforcing feedback loop. Right, so from the over-representation perspective, here's conversely some data about, you know, on the left, you have the Oakland PD drug arrests from 2010. And then on the right, you have self-ascribed drug users from 2011 as collected by the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. So I think that you can see, right, on the right, self-ascribed drug users is a different map of red than on the left for the people who actually get arrested for drug use. So a disparity, objectively. What accounts for the difference? So, you know, the data set, again, is focused on crimes recorded, not crimes committed, right? And so it's an incomplete census of all crimes that exist. It's just the ones that we saw and recorded, and is not a representative random sample. And lots of folks have written about like, how is it not representative, right? So the markup did their own kind of analysis of this, and I think everybody probably sees this coming, hopefully, but the predictions for white neighborhoods were many, many, many fewer than the predictions for communities of color. And I think that this holds true through all of the into science papers, all the publications, et cetera. Communities of color are overrepresented in this data. So in a slightly different context, the Bogota, Colombia districts give data about victim-reported crime. So there was a study that looked at the victim-reported crime statistics and found similarly that communities of color were overrepresented in the data. I don't know if anyone remembers this incident. There's many, many, many others like it. But the Central Park birdwatching incident was an incident between a black man and a white woman, where the black man was birdwatching in Central Park. The white woman was like walking her dog not on a leash, and the dog need to be leashed in this particular place. The man asked her to leash her dog, and she called the police on him. So I think just like one anecdote of the point that I'm trying to make here is that communities of color have historically been and continue to be over-policed and over-surveilled compared to white communities. And there's been criminological research that dates back centuries, as early as 1897, that talks about the disparity in the census data of how we have incomplete input for crimes committed versus crimes recorded. And scholars argue that like this field of surveillance is actually not new at all, and has been foundational since pretty much the beginnings of America. So in the 17th century, there were lantern laws in the United States, and they essentially demanded that black and mixed race and indigenous enslaved people carry candle lanterns with them if they walked around in the city and they were unaccompanied by a white person. So like as early as the 17th century, there is like foundational patterns of surveillance of people of color, and I'm making the case that we continue to see that today, which emerges in the data and emerges in the difference in observation, and as a result, a difference in the data that's recorded. More of the same. So let's talk about the self-reinforcing feedback loop, which is, I think, like a slightly different angle to this. So the first point is about overrepresentation. I'll very quickly talk about underrepresentation as well, but the point there is that like the data is unbalanced and it's not a complete census, which I think is extrapolatable to other case studies beyond predictive policing. So self-reinforcing feedback loops, similarly, I think that this is like a challenge that developers and teams and applications can get into, and is extrapolatable beyond this use case. And the idea is that so when there's a prediction and the police officer is in that particular place where the prediction is, any crime that they observe gets reported and then brought back into the system. So it builds this kind of like runaway feedback loop where you're self-perpetuating the data that you tell yourself, and then the model learns from that, and then you can get kind of in a bad feedback loop where your data's, again, incomplete and inaccurate. And the training data becomes amplified, essentially. And like I said, this is also like extrapolatable beyond the context of predictive policing. So we'll get to mitigations, but just very quickly about underrepresentation, right? So like predictive policing and policing of communities of color is like one case where I think communities of color are overrepresented. I think there's also a lot of cases where certain types of groups are underrepresented, and I think like unsurprisingly it ends up being marginalized groups. So in the realm of healthcare, people of color are underrepresented in that space. So, when doctors are training, nurses are training, et cetera, like the dermatological field is one example where just like the training data that you're training as a doctor to be a dermatologist is just lacking for people of color. And as a result, the results for people of color end up being worse just because the data is not there. This exists in like a non-AI context, and it also exists in an AI context, right? So when you add AI on top of that, you get the same outcomes because the data is disparate. Also true for public safety, right? So Predpol Geolytica does not use facial recognition, but there are facial recognition technologies that exist that are sold to government agencies, police, immigration, all that kind of stuff. Facial recognition doesn't work well for people of color. And this is specifically true for women of color. So, across the demographics, women of color fare the worst. And so, I mean, 68%, like, that's not 0.4%, but it's still much, much, much lower than lighter males, which you're seeing at 100% here. This is Amazon's recognition, and it's from 2008, so maybe the numbers are a little bit different now, but it is true that like women of color are historically the least recognized in facial recognition software. And then, a more recent example from the workforce realm, ChatGPT, this is from 2023, replicates gender bias in recommendation letters. So, men are like driven and then women are like beautiful, just like typical whoopsies. And then this is a little bit older, but like a while back, Amazon had like this AI recruiting tool and it showed bias against women. Again, I think the reason here is that the data is just not in the corpus, right? So this recruiting tool was looking at, let's say, resumes of like a women-only college or like women's volleyball, and it was like penalizing those candidates because it's like an anomaly in the data set. Okay, so going back to this, right? The idea that like technologies themselves are ethically neutral is, I think, dubious. I want to be clear that like I think this is all about like people with good intentions, bad outcomes. Like I don't think that any of this is like nefarious bad actors. I think those people exist. That's not the focus of this talk. So on the contrary, right, like people are trying to do good work here, right? Like people are trying to keep people safe, move healthcare forward, et cetera. It's like with the best intentions that we still fall short of neutral, and we end up actually causing and perpetuating harm. So this is hard. This is like the hardest problem that I think I'm aware of in AI. If other people have harder problems, please let's talk about them. The data set, the fallibility of the data set kind of is foundational, right? So if your model is trained on poor data or incomplete data, that ends up bubbling up all the way up. And the large LLMs are trained on huge swaths of data that all of us combined, if we put our powers combined, I hope that we could, but I'm not sure we could match a data set like that, right? And a lot of it, like also the data is missing, right? So with all of the underrepresentational things, like there is no data to backport that would make like a balanced data set. So it's a hard problem. So I guess what I'm asking today is like for our understanding of the problem. So like understand that this is a thing that happens. And I would love for us to like advocate. Let's advocate for right sizing over or underrepresentation in data sets and make right some of these disparities. In the meantime, what do we do to mitigate? I do a lot of like what we call responsible AI, and there's like some principles and tactics that go into that. Starting from the bottom, not all of this is like responsible AI formally, but I think that these are things that folks could do that might help. So at the bottom, you have the model. All of this data set stuff, I think, is related to the model. That you could put a safety system on top of that where you're making sure that something executes every time that model is used. And then there's like some optional things you can do with additional meta prompts and user experience and all that kind of stuff. Consider the data set. Think about where your data is coming from. Most of us are consumers of other models that are out there in the market, right? I don't know anyone. If someone here is rolling their own model, I would love to talk. Most of us are consumers of what's in the market, right? So like OpenAI has their foundational models. Hugging Face has a lot of models that are out there that you can choose from. Claude has their set of bespoke models. And I guess just ask, consider the data set and take a look at what your models are being trained on. If it's applicable for your use case, you can fine tune your models. So the idea is that like you can do additional training on top of a trained model, and that helps you adapt to a new domain or genre. So if the LLMs are like general knowledge, right? So you can do some training on top of that to help them be more precise in a particular domain. You can adapt to new data. So there's like a time for which like LLMs are trained, and after that time, if you ask them something that happened last year, like they don't know. So if you want to incorporate new data, you can fine tune your model, improve performance on specific tasks, or you can customize output. So if you want it to have a particular vibe, you can like fine tune the model on top of what it comes with, basically. Similarly, OpenAI gives you like tool sets and documentation for how you can fine tune your model. You can run a Python notebook and make this happen. Hugging Face has transformers that do the same thing. And then Azure AI also has documentation of how you can do this. Anthropic as well. So Anthropic saw, this is not strictly related to ethics, but they saw like improvement in classification with fine-tuned models. So bonus, you can also improve your accuracy, which helps. I guess that does help with harm, right? You can choose a small language model instead of an LLM. So LLMs are meant to be big and for general knowledge. Like sometimes it is helpful to have less content to learn from. So if it's applicable to your use case, you can train them for relatively smaller domain-specific data sets. And then the risk of bias is generally lower because it's not trying to like roll the whole world. This was yesterday. GPT-4 Mini was announced. Again, not necessarily with the lens of ethics, but everyone's excited about 4.0, so we also have 4.0 Mini, which is a smaller LLM, small language model. And then like we use for code search, we've had a lot of luck with text embedding 3, small. So it's a small embeddings model. There's a large version as well, but we found at GitHub that the small one works just fine, and it's cheaper to run as well. Avoid self-reinforcing feedback loops, right? So this is like you can get yourself between a rock and a hard place by perpetuating your own data set and getting actually away from truth as far as we can get there. Obviously, predpol is one example where the data set is being fed back into it, and like the flip side of that is human input, right? So you have your data that you're putting in, but you also have like a human to kind of course correct. So balance those two things. I think, but don't go too far, right? So I don't know if folks remember Tay, the racist AI robot. I think they became racist in like 8 hours or something like that. And like that was all user-generated feedback, right? So Tay is like chatting with people on Twitter, and people are feeding Tay, the bot, racist content, and then like 8 hours later, she's super racist. So that's like the other end of the spectrum where it's all human input, and I think probably you want to be somewhere in the middle. Safety prompt. So along with every model, there's like prompting that goes out. It's my perspective that you should have a safety prompt that goes out with every message. And that really assures that you are giving the model directives to not do particular things. So I think that this is common practice with the LLMs that you would get on the market. Certainly like ChatGPT, et cetera, has like the safety prompts. If you're looking on Hugging Face, I haven't looked at all the models. So like just make sure that there's like some sort of safety prompt that's triggering every time. And then meta prompts, you can build your own meta prompts on top of that, right? So like direct a model to do a particular thing, and that might be, it might depend on your case, right? So you might not always want it to do X, you might want it to do Y, but that's something that you can add on top of your application that doesn't execute every time, but is context dependent. So here's, like some examples about how you can be more effective, right? So you can tell the AI not to do something, but you can also tell it not to do something, but what to do instead. And that tends to work a little bit better. There's a lot on this slide. I'll share the slides later, but this kind of gives you an overview of how you can structure your meta prompts to be more effective, right? So you can define what the model's profile and capability should be. You can define what output you want them to have. You can provide examples, et cetera. And then these are just like additional steps that you can use to like move your model in a particular place. And the last bit here is like user experience. So a couple of things that we've had success with Copilot and .com chat is like highlighting grounded content. So grounded content means that like it has like a source that it's pulling that data from. And our goal here is like trust, right? So we want like folks to trust Copilot and trust the AI. So we bubble that stuff up when it exists so that you know where your AI is like getting that data. So here's an example. So this is on github.com. I'm asking me, can you tell me what was the latest commit to this repo? And you can see like which function is being called, and we surface that to the user. Another example here. So on the right, sorry, this is a little small, but like, so we use what we call knowledge bases, which is essentially just like markdown files of documentation, and you can create your knowledge base. So I'm asking like what the hub is like our policies, right? Like what's the hub policy on vacation time? So the first one you can see it's using search results from the primer knowledge base, and I know like that's not what I want actually. So then, sorry, this is a bad screenshot, but I attach the hub knowledge base, and I ask again, okay, like what is the vacation time policy? And you can see in the second example, it's bubbling up what is the function that's being called and what's the knowledge base that's being called. So kind of the idea here is that you bubble that up to the user and help them understand what's happening, help them understand that the tools that the model is using, and they can see for themselves and they can course correct. Last thing, sorry, one more thing, red team testing. I've done a lot of red team testing. You want to test and determine whether there are gaps in your safety prompt, right? So what we do is essentially like pepper the LLM with like jailbreak attacks, or give me this bad content, give me that bad content, and you see how many of the requests the model complies with, and then you have kind of like a defect rate, and you should pick a percentage that you want it to be at, and then you repeat, right? So you adjust the prompts a little bit, run the red teaming again, adjust the prompts, and try to get that to an acceptable level of risk for you, whatever that is. And here's some categories of harm that we focus on. So like harmful content, ungrounded content, generation of malware, incorrect or insecure code for Copilot, right? We don't want that. Prompt injection, and then like IP protection and copyright issues. We try to catch that stuff and build the prompts around it so it doesn't happen. Just want to wrap it up. Technologies meant to be neutral are often not neutral. Please remember that. And it's really up to us to kind of be a player in this space and advocate for improving things. I don't know if we have time for questions. We do, yeah. I love it. Thank you all.
Ryan Stevens from RAMP. One thought here is, do you just feel like it's all about measurement? Because in the police example, the counterfactual without that system could be worse. It's just they had actually measured outcomes like effectively for these AI systems. So is that kind of the root thing here, is like what is a good outcome, and make sure you're measuring it?
Yeah, what do you mean, sorry, counterfactual?
Counterfactual, like without that system, it could have been that the police are going to places that actually don't have high crime rates, or that are biased, or certain neighborhoods.
So the question is, is this outcome, the predpol outcome, the police going to a predicted area of crime, a better outcome than them not having this data?
Yes, but I think isn't the issue more just like measure what's a successful outcome for your system, like continuously?
Certainly, I think everybody should be measuring what is a successful outcome. I also think it's important to consider like what is the baseline from what we're measuring from. So I think like the point for the predpol case is that like the data is unbalanced, right? So we're only observing crimes that we're only recording crimes that we observe, and we only observe a subset of the crime. So it's not actually reflective of the crimes being committed. So in that sense, it's not serving accuracy.
Yeah, but the system could be doing better, even with that bias, right? Like, I'm not saying it is. I'm not defending predpol in any sort of...
I would look at the police departments that did use it and then ceased using it, and then eventually like canceled the subscriptions as evidence of that. So I'm not sure if 100% of police departments have done that, but certainly like most of them have. And as was mentioned, like predpol has done like a rebrand. It's Geolytica now, and like the CEO is like out of office. So I think like the data seems from police departments that it's not worth keeping, and it doesn't work well.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. One more
I'm just curious what impact maybe anonymizing data or running comparative or competitive data models might be able to have impact-wise in creating a less bias, or at least creating more or less, for lack of a better term, a BS indicator.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, certainly I think that there could be other models out there. Like, I think the premise of this is helpful, right? If you have accurate data of where crimes are likely to happen, yeah, go stop them. Like, that sounds great. I think just the mechanics of how we do that is poor. And I think, like the premise today is that I think we're in some neighborhoods watching already, and then we get that data. So if I also don't want to advocate for like surveillance everywhere either. Like, I don't know if that's a great option, but certainly like the premise itself, I think, is not terrible. The execution, it just doesn't work.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.